welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. My coffee spilled across the dashboard as I swerved to avoid the sedan that cut me off. Perfect, I muttered, watching the brown liquid seep into the crevices of my car's interior. Already 15 minutes late for work. And now this. I grabbed napkins from the glove compartment and dabbed at the mess, checking my watch again. Peterson would notice my absence at the 9 a.m. meeting. He always did. The radio announcer droned on about the unseasonably warm October weather as I merged onto the highway. Traffic moved at a crawl, brake lights stretching ahead like a red constellation. I tapped the steering wheel, recalculating my arrival time, mentally rehearsing excuses, car trouble, family emergency, or just the truth. I overslept because I stayed up too late finishing expense reports. The music cut out mid-song, replaced by 3 sharp beeps that pierced the morning haze. Emergency alert. Atmospheric anomaly detected. Remain indoors if possible. Avoid prolonged exposure to outdoor air. This is not a drill. The announcer returned immediately afterward, continuing as if nothing had happened. I frowned, glancing at the sky through my windshield. Clear blue. Not a cloud in sight, no storms, no visible pollution, just another autumn morning. Probably some technical test they forgot to label as such. Or maybe an air quality warning for the elderly and immunocompromised. Nothing that concerned a healthy 32-year-old financial analyst running late for a quarterly review. I arrived at Meridian Financial 23 minutes late, hurrying through the lobby toward the elevator. The security guard, Marcus, nodded at me without his usual morning banter. He looked tired, dark circles prominent under his eyes, his gaze slightly unfocused. Flu season was starting early this year. Morning, Marcus. Everything okay? I asked, swiping my badge. He blinked slowly. Morning, Morgan. Yeah, fine. His voice sounded flat, mechanical. I stepped into the elevator, making a mental note to bring him coffee tomorrow. The poor guy looked like he needed it. The office was quieter than usual for a Wednesday. Several desks sat empty, monitors dark. I slipped into my cubicle, powering up my computer while scanning for Peterson. No sign of him yet, a small mercy. Hey, where's everyone? I asked Diane, whose desk faced mine. She was staring at her screen, scrolling through something, her face pallid in the blue light. Out sick, she replied without looking up. Davis, Thompson, and Lowenstein called in. Chun went home an hour ago, said he felt dizzy. For people out of our 12-person department. Unusual, but not unprecedented during flu season. Meeting still on? Postponed till tomorrow. Diane finally looked at me, and I noticed the same exhaustion I'd seen in Marcus. You didn't get Peterson's email? I checked my inbox. Nothing. Server issues. Diane explained, returning to her screen. IT's been working on it since 6 this morning. The reprieve from the meeting allowed me to catch up on yesterday's unfinished work. I spent the morning analyzing quarterly projections, occasionally glancing out the window at the city below. Midtown bustled with its usual activity, though perhaps the sidewalks seemed less crowded than normal. Around noon, I noticed what looked like a light dusting of ash on the windowsill outside, probably pollution from the construction site 2 blocks over. The office remained subdued throughout the day. Conversations were minimal. mostly about deadlines and deliverables. No one mentioned the emergency alert. When I brought it up during lunch, Diane shrugged. Heard something about a chemical spill upstate, she said, picking at her salad without eating much. Nothing serious. Apparently, by 5. I packed up, noting that Diane had left early without saying goodbye. Unlike her, the elevator down was empty, and Marcus had been replaced by a younger guard I didn't recognize. The evening traffic moved surprisingly well. I turned on the radio for company, flipping stations until I found music instead of news. The song cut off abruptly, replaced by the now familiar 3 beeps. Emergency alert. Do not approach ash-covered figures. Maintain distance. Stay indoors after sunset. Further information will follow. I frowned, turning up the volume, but the station had already switched back to music as if nothing had interrupted it. Ash-covered figures? What the hell did that mean? My phone buzzed. No service. Strange. I always had at least 2 bars on this stretch of road. I tried rebooting it as I drove, but the no service icon remained stubbornly in place. The sunset painted the sky in unusual colors, deep reds and purples that seemed too intense, too saturated. The air had a metallic quality to it, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. I rolled up my window, suddenly uneasy without knowing why. As I turned onto my street, I noticed small patches of what looked like gray snow on some lawns and sidewalks. The same ash-like substance I'd seen on the office windowsill, now more widespread. My logical mind immediately categorized it: industrial pollution, or maybe ash from distant wildfires carried by high-altitude winds. The news would explain it eventually. I pulled into my assigned spot at the apartment complex, gathering my things, when movement caught my eye. Mr. Haversham, the retired accountant from 3B, stood in his small front yard. He remained perfectly still, facing away from me, head tilted slightly upward toward the darkening sky. Evening, Mr. Haversham, I called, more out of habit than desire for conversation. He didn't respond or move, not even a twitch of acknowledgement. I might have walked over to check on him, but something stopped me, the unnatural stillness of his posture, perhaps, or the memory of the strange alert on the radio. Instead, I squinted, trying to make out more details in the fading light. A fine layer of gray dust covered his shoulders and the back of his head. Each hair seemed individually coated, creating an outline that was simultaneously Mr. Haversham and not him at all, as if someone had created a detailed statue and placed it in his yard. Do not approach ash-covered figures. The alert's words echoed in my mind, raising goosebumps on my arms despite the warm evening. I hurried inside, locking my door behind me, trying to dismiss the cold feeling settling in my stomach. Mr. Haversham was probably just inspecting something in his yard. The gray appearance was a trick of the light, or maybe he'd been gardening with some kind of fertilizer. There was a perfectly rational explanation, as there always was. I went through my evening routine, changed clothes, microwaved leftovers, checked emails on my laptop since my phone still showed no service. No mention of any emergency in my inbox. No texts from concerned friends or family. Just ordinary life continuing as it should. Before bed, I peeked through my blinds one last time, half expecting Mr. Haversham to be gone. He wasn't. His silhouette remained in the exact same position, now barely visible in the darkness. A gray statue under the yellow glow of the street lamp. And he wasn't alone anymore. 2 more figures had joined him, equally still, equally ash-covered, all facing the same direction. I let the blinds snap shut and double-checked my locks, telling myself I was being ridiculous. Tomorrow everything would make sense. Tomorrow there would be explanations. Tonight, though, I would follow the alert's advice and stay indoors, just to be safe. Sleep came in restless waves, broken by the occasional sound of sirens in the distance. I woke before my alarm, disoriented and unrest. The events of yesterday, especially those ash-covered figures in the yard, seemed less ominous in the morning light filtering through my blinds. I reached for my phone. Still no service. Unusual, but not unprecedented. Network outages happened. My Wi-Fi worked, though, so I opened my laptop while brewing coffee, scanning news sites for information about the emergency alerts. The top story on every major outlet mentioned an atmospheric incident. Details varied wildly between sources. The Associated Press called it an industrial accident at a chemical plant upstate, while CNN described unusual particulate matter of unknown origin. Fox News blamed a foreign weather experiment gone wrong, and local news suggested controlled burns from nearby forest management had created unexpected air quality issues. None mentioned ash-covered figures. My coffee finished brewing as I skimmed the articles. Each contained a paragraph of vague reassurance. Authorities were investigating. The situation was contained, and citizens should continue normal activities while staying alert to further updates. No specific department or agency was cited as the source of this information. I showered and dressed for work, hesitating at the window before checking outside. The street looked normal, cars moving, people walking dogs, morning routines in progress. No sign of Mr. Haversham or the other figures from last night. Maybe I'd imagined them, or exaggerated ordinary behavior into something sinister due to that strange alert. As I gathered my things to leave, the television in my living room switched on by itself. I froze, keys in hand, watching as the screen displayed the emergency alert system graphic. Emergency alert. Multiple incidents reported citywide. Ash-covered individuals are not to be approached under any circumstances. If you observe unusual behavior or gray residue, maintain distance and report to local authorities. This message will repeat. The message played 3 times before the TV shut off automatically. I stood there, unmoving, as silence filled the apartment once more. My rational mind immediately sought explanations. A system test gone wrong. Hackers accessing the emergency broadcast system. Some overzealous official responding to pollution with dramatic warnings. Yet the memory of those still figures remained uncomfortably vivid. I opened my notes app and documented what I'd seen so far. The alerts, the ash on the windowsill, Mr. Haversham's strange behavior, the conflicting news reports. If I tracked everything systematically, patterns would emerge. Information brought clarity. Clarity dispelled fear. The drive to work revealed subtle changes to the cityscape. Traffic was lighter than usual. Several businesses had closed signs hanging in their windows. At one intersection, I spotted a military Humvee parked near the entrance to the freeway. 2 uniformed soldiers standing beside it, observing passing vehicles. The office parking lot was half empty. Inside, the atmosphere felt brittle. Conversations hushed and truncated. 8 more people had called out sick, including Peterson. Diane sat at her desk, her movements robotic as she typed, eyes fixed on her monitor. "Morning," I said, setting down my bag. "Any updates on the server issues?" She didn't look up. "Fixed. Check your email." "Have you heard anything about this atmospheric incident? The news reports are all over the place." Her typing paused. "Government says it's under control." "And you believe that?" This time she turned to face me. Something about her eyes seemed different. Flatter. Less present. "Why wouldn't I? They know what they're doing." The response was so unlike Diane. Perpetually skeptical. Anti-authority Diane, that I stared at her for a moment too long. She returned to her typing without waiting for my reply. I opened my email to find a message from upper management. Due to the ongoing situation and resulting staff shortages, all non-essential meetings are postponed until further notice. Please continue regular duties as able and contact HR with any concerns. The vagueness was troubling. What ongoing situation? Why not name it directly? I spent the morning inputting quarterly figures, occasionally glancing out the window. The ash particles were more visible today, drifting lazily through the air like microscopic snow. When I looked closely at the window itself, I could see a thin layer accumulating along the edges. The office emptied gradually throughout the day. People left for lunch and didn't return, or received phone calls that sent them hurrying for the elevators. By 3 o'clock, only Diane, myself, and 2 others remained on our floor. My growling stomach reminded me I'd skipped lunch. The break room vending machine offered limited options. I settled for a granola bar and chips. As I waited for the machine to dispense my selections, I noticed a dusty handprint on its glass front, fingertips elongated, as if the hand had been dragged downward while still touching the surface. Back at my desk, I added this observation to my notes app. Alongside others from the day, Diane's unusual demeanor, military presence, increasing ash accumulation, handprint on vending machine, office attendance down 68%. At 4:30, I decided to leave early. The emptiness of the office had become oppressive, the silence interrupted only by the occasional ping of an email arriving or Diane's mechanical typing. "I'm heading out," I told her, gathering my things. "See you tomorrow?" She nodded without looking up. Tomorrow. The grocery store on my route home was a chaos of empty shelves and frantic shoppers. I grabbed a cart and navigated the aisles, selecting non-perishables almost automatically. Canned soup, crackers, peanut butter, bottled water. The rational part of my mind mocked this behavior. I was preparing for an emergency that probably didn't exist, but I couldn't shake the growing unease. In the produce section, a tall figure stood motionless before the empty Apple display. Gray dust covered their clothing and hair, a fine layer that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the fluorescent lighting. Other shoppers gave them a wide berth, averting their eyes as they hurried past. I found myself approaching, curiosity momentarily overriding caution. "Excuse me," I said when I was still several feet away. "Are you all right?" The figure didn't respond or acknowledge me in any way. Close, I could see that the ash wasn't just on their clothing. It seemed to have replaced the texture of the fabric itself, transforming it into something both solid and insubstantial. "Sir, do you need help?" I tried again, taking one step closer. The figure's head rotated toward me with mechanical precision, no other part of their body moving. Their face was human in structure but rendered alien by the ash covering, features blurred, eyes black voids in the gray terrain of their skin. They made no sound, no expression, just that unblinking stare. I backed away, abandoning my cart, the warning echoing in my mind: do not approach ash-covered individuals. Outside, a military truck rolled slowly down the street, a loudspeaker mounted on its roof. "Emergency alert. Quarantine procedures in effect for sectors 5 through 12. Remain calm. Follow instructions from authorized personnel. Do not approach affected individuals." I drove home in silence, no longer trusting the radio. The streets were eerily empty now, the few pedestrians hurrying with heads down, masks covering their faces. At one intersection, I watched a group of soldiers in hazmat suits directing a line of ash-covered figures into the back of a containment vehicle. My apartment building seemed deserted when I arrived. I carried my groceries upstairs, noticing more gray handprints along the hallway walls. Mrs. Geller's door across from mine stood partially open, her apartment dark within. I considered checking on her, then remembered her coughing fit 2 days ago that I'd attributed to her smoking habit. Inside my apartment, I locked the door and pushed my heaviest bookcase in front of it. The action seemed simultaneously ridiculous and inadequate. I stored my groceries, then checked my phone again. Still no service. But the Wi-Fi allowed me to browse increasingly contradictory news updates until the internet connection failed entirely around 9 p.m. After that, I sat in darkness by the window, watching. More ash-covered figures had gathered in the courtyard below, standing motionless, all facing the same direction. Some I recognized as neighbors, others were strangers. They were waiting for something, or listening. I went to the bathroom to splash cold water on my face. As I reached for the faucet, I noticed a light dusting of gray powder along the sink's edge. I couldn't remember if it had been there before. I jerked awake to darkness and silence. The power was out. My phone showed 3:47 a.m. Still no service. Battery at 62%. I used its flashlight to navigate to the kitchen, where I rummaged through drawers until I found an old emergency radio, a relic from my be prepared phase after the hurricane 3 years ago. The radio crackled to life, its batteries miraculously still functioning. Most stations broadcast only static. The few that remained operational played looped messages about staying indoors and awaiting further instructions. No music, no banter, no commercials, just the same pre-recorded voices repeating the same vague assurances. I turned a knob, scanning frequencies, and stopped when I heard what sounded like a live broadcast. Increasingly apparent that official response has been inadequate. We're receiving reports of mass transformations in sectors 8 through 17. Military roadblocks have been established on major highways, but witnesses describe soldiers abandoning posts or, in some cases, exhibiting symptoms themselves. If you're in an affected area, barricade all entrances, and the broadcast cut to static. I tried the faucet. Water flowed, but with significantly less pressure than normal. I filled every available container, pots, pitchers, the bathtub before it stopped completely around 5 a.m. Dawn revealed a transformed world through my window. The ash now covered every surface outside like a light snowfall, swirling in gentle eddies with each breeze. The figures in the courtyard had multiplied overnight. Some stood in the same positions as yesterday. Others had moved to form concentric circles around the central fountain. My laptop battery wouldn't last long, so I used it sparingly, checking for messages or updates. No emails since yesterday afternoon. Social media sites failed to load. The few news websites still functioning displayed a uniform message. Alert. Quarantine zones established. Report ash exposure immediately. Do not make physical contact with affected individuals. Around noon, a new message broadcast from the military trucks outside. Emergency alert. All citizens must remain in their current locations. Evacuation routes are compromised. Aid is incoming. Report any symptoms to the emergency hotline. The listed hotline number didn't connect when I tried calling from my landline, which still functioned despite the internet outage. My apartment felt increasingly like a cage, but the alternative seemed worse. I rationed my food and water, marking inventory in my notes app, calculating how long I could remain self-sufficient. By afternoon, restlessness drove me to risk venturing out, not to flee, just to gather more information. I covered my mouth and nose with a dampened cloth, tucked my hair under a baseball cap, and slipped on gloves. The precautions were probably useless, but they provided an illusion of protection. The hallway contained more ash than yesterday, Fine gray powder accumulated in corners and along baseboards. Mrs. Geller's door remained ajar. I paused before it, listening for any sound within. Nothing. I moved on without checking inside. The warning about avoiding contact with affected individuals fresh in my mind. Outside, the air felt thick, almost gelatinous in my lungs despite the mask. The street was deserted except for abandoned vehicles and more ash-covered figures. Dozens now, positioned at seemingly random intervals along sidewalks and in the road itself. They didn't react to my presence. I gave them wide berth nonetheless. 3 blocks from my apartment, I encountered a military checkpoint. 2 soldiers in hazmat suits directed a small group of civilians toward a screening area where technicians swabbed mouths and hands. Those who passed were ushered into a containment vehicle with "Secure Transit" stenciled on its side. Those who failed, showing gray residue on the test swabs, were escorted to a separate area behind opaque plastic barriers. I watched from the shelter of an alleyway as a young woman tested positive. The technician marked her hand with red dye, and 2 soldiers guided her behind the barriers. She went without resistance, face blank beneath her mask. Minutes later, the soldiers returned alone. No one emerged from behind those barriers. I backed away from the checkpoint, heart hammering against my ribs. Whatever aid the government provided, I wanted no part of it. I turned to retreat to my apartment and froze. An ash figure stood at the alley's entrance, perfectly still yet somehow aware of me. Unlike the others, this one's head tracked my movement when I shifted position. The gray covering seemed thicker on this individual, obliterating all identifying features except a vague human outline. I remained motionless, barely breathing, searching for escape routes. The figure made no move to approach, but its presence blocked my most direct path home. After what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, turned away, moving with unnatural smoothness down the street. It had recognized me as different but chose not to engage. Why? I took a circuitous route back, avoiding main streets, documenting everything in my mental notes to transfer later. The most disturbing observation wasn't the military presence or the ash figures. It was where the ash originated. It wasn't falling from the sky as I'd initially assumed. It seemed to be spreading from person to person, object to object, like a contagion seeking new hosts. Back in my apartment, I scrubbed my skin raw in the shower, using my remaining water reserves. The mirror revealed no gray traces on my face or hands, but paranoia made me check repeatedly. I burned my outer clothing in the kitchen sink, watching the fabric curl and blacken. As darkness fell, I heard movement in the hallway outside my door, shuffling footsteps, then silence, then a soft scraping against my door. The bookcase barricade held firm. The scraping continued intermittently throughout the night. My radio picked up fewer stations now. One broadcast, sounding like an amateur transmission, provided the first theory that resonated with my observations. The ash isn't a byproduct of something else, it is the something else. It's not contamination, it's conversion, and it's spreading faster than they predicted. The transmission cut off mid-sentence, replaced by an official alert. Emergency alert. Quarantine zones have been expanded. Military operations are ongoing. Disregard unauthorized broadcasts. Help is coming. I added "they're lying about help" to my notes app, then paused, staring at the gray smudge on my screen where my finger had touched it. Had that been there before? Couldn't remember. Paranoia played tricks on the mind. The building's maintenance worker, Eduardo, knocked on my door the next morning. I peered through the peephole before moving the bookcase. He appeared normal. No ash visible on his skin or clothing. Water's gone throughout the building, he said when I opened the door a crack. Chain still fastened. Electric company says power back maybe tomorrow. But I don't believe them. Too many workers sick. Have you seen the people outside? The ones covered in ash? I asked. Eduardo's expression darkened. Not people anymore. Whatever they are. My cousin worked at the research center upstate. Called me first day this started happening. Said it was some government experiment gone wrong. Some kind of new organism they were studying. Got out somehow. What kind of organism turns people into statues? The kind that doesn't want us to know what it's doing until it's too late. Eduardo glanced over his shoulder. I'm heading out of the city tonight. Roads are blocked. But I know ways through the drainage tunnels. You should come. I hesitated. I don't think about it. He interrupted. Apartment 1C at midnight if you change your mind. Bring only what you can carry. He turned to leave, then added, and check yourself carefully. They can tell if you're starting to change. After he left, I returned to my window observation post. The ash figures had organized into a more deliberate pattern now, forming straight lines radiating outward from central points like spokes on a wheel. They were communicating somehow, coordinating. The randomness of their earlier positioning had been an illusion, or perhaps an earlier stage of whatever this was. The radio crackled with a new alert as the sun began to set. Emergency alert. Safe zones compromised. Remain in place. Help is coming. Through my window, I watched an ash figure standing perfectly still in the rain that had begun to fall. The water ran off its surface without dampening it, like oil on stone. I checked my bathroom sink again. The gray dust had spread, forming intricate patterns that reminded me of circuit boards or neural networks. I wasn't imagining it anymore. It was here, with me, and I had decisions to make before midnight. I spent the hours before midnight deliberating, weighing options with the methodical precision that had defined my pre-crisis existence. The rational choice seemed clear. Stay put with my dwindling supplies rather than risk exposure in the chaos outside. Yet Eduardo's warning echoed in my thoughts. The apartment wasn't safe either. Nothing was. At 11:50 p.m., I packed a backpack, remaining food, first aid supplies, flashlight, batteries, my notes documenting everything I'd observed. I double-checked the bathroom sink before leaving. The circuit-like patterns had expanded, now covering the entire basin in delicate gray tracery. The hallway stretched before me, dimly lit by my flashlight. Most apartment doors stood ajar, some splintered around their locks, others appearing to have been opened from within. Ash collected in corners and along baseboards, forming the same intricate patterns I'd seen in my sink. Eduardo waited in 1C. Door cracked open just enough to show a sliver of candlelight. For others huddled in his living room, a middle-aged couple, an elderly man, and a teenage girl. All looked exhausted, eyes hollow with days of strain. My neighbor's safe, Eduardo announced as I entered. Morgan's an analyst, notices patterns. The group regarded me with cautious assessment. The teenage girl spoke first. Did you get screened? Her voice cracked from disuse or fear. No, I replied. I saw what happens to those who test positive. Smart, said the older man, nodding. Government's not containing this. They're collecting. Collecting what, though? Asked the woman, her hand clutched tightly in her partner's. Are they studying it? Looking for a cure? No cure for something that's not a disease, Eduardo said, checking his watch. We move in 10 minutes. Everybody clear on the route. A chorus of nods. They'd clearly been briefed before my arrival. What about the military checkpoints? I asked. Abandoned most of them yesterday, Eduardo replied. The ones still manned are understaffed. Soldiers are disappearing too, transforming. Outside, A new message blared from the emergency broadcast speakers mounted on lampposts. Emergency alert. Mandatory evacuation. Proceed to designated safe zones. Screening required. The same message I'd heard yesterday, now contradicting the remain in place instruction from earlier. The inconsistency wasn't accidental, it was strategic. Conflicting directions created movement, confusion, exposure, herding people toward those screening centers where the positive testers vanished behind barriers. We departed in single file, Eduardo leading, the elderly man last. The night air felt dense with moisture and particulate matter, ash swirling visibly in the beams of our flashlights. The street seemed deserted, but shadows shifted in peripheral vision, figures moving just beyond the range of clear sight. Our route took us through alleyways and service passages Eduardo knew from his maintenance work. We avoided main streets where ash figures congregated in their eerie formations, now arranged in concentric circles around major intersections. The figures remained stationary but seemed aware of our passing, heads rotating slightly to track our movement, though no other part of their bodies moved. "They're listening," whispered the teenage girl when we paused in the shadow of an abandoned delivery truck. Not to us, to something else. The observation sent ice through my veins because it matched my own unspoken thought. The stillness of the figures wasn't passive. It was focused, like satellite dishes oriented toward a distant signal. We reached a drainage tunnel access point behind a defunct shopping center. Eduardo produced a large wrench from his pack and removed the heavy grate covering the entrance. 2 miles along this main tunnel, he instructed. Then we branch right at the junction. That route bypasses the bridge checkpoint. The tunnel stretched before us, dark and claustrophobic. Our flashlight beams caught the gleam of water trickling along its base, reflecting the circular stonework overhead. We descended in sequence, Eduardo securing the grate behind us. The journey through the tunnels felt interminable. The air grew increasingly stale as we progressed, heavy with moisture and the unmistakable mineral scent of the ash that had followed us underground, coating the walls in patches that grew more frequent as we advanced. At a bend in the tunnel, our beams illuminated a figure standing motionless in the shallow water, ash-covered, featureless. It blocked our path completely. We froze in unified terror. "There's another route," Eduardo whispered, backing away slowly. "Secondary maintenance tunnel. We'll have to double back." The ash figure remained stationary as we retreated, but I felt its awareness, its attention fixed on our group. When we reached the junction Eduardo had mentioned, he directed us down a narrower passage to the left instead of the right branch we'd originally planned to take. "This connects to the same exit point," he assured us. "Just a longer route." The elderly man began coughing, the sound echoing alarmingly through the tunnel. The middle-aged woman supported him, concern evident in her hushed encouragements. "We need to rest." Just for a few minutes, we paused in a maintenance alcove, passing around a water bottle. When it reached the elderly man, he drank gratefully, then began another coughing fit. In the harsh beam of the teenager's flashlight, I noticed gray residue on his palm where he'd covered his mouth. Eduardo saw it too. His expression hardened with grim resignation. "I'm sorry, sir," he said quietly. "You can't continue with us." The man looked at his hand, then at our faces. Understanding dawned in his rheumy eyes. "How long have I had it?" No one answered. No one knew. I felt strange. "Yesterday morning," he admitted, "dizzy, cold inside. Thought it was just fear." "What happens to them?" the teenager asked, voice barely audible. "To the people who change? They're not dead," I found myself saying, the certainty of it surprising me. They're connected to something else, repurposed. The man nodded slowly, as if my words confirmed his own suspicions. I'll stay here. Continue without me. No, the woman protested. We can't just leave him. You must. The man said. I can feel it spreading inside me, like ice in my veins. Soon I won't be me anymore. We left him in the alcove with a flashlight and the remainder of our water. His calm acceptance haunted me more than fear would have. He knew what waited for him, what waited for all of us, perhaps, and had made peace with it. The rest of our journey through the tunnels passed in tense silence. When we finally emerged through a maintenance hatch into the pre-dawn air, we found ourselves on the outskirts of the city, but not beyond the reach of the phenomenon. Ash figures stood here too, spaced at regular intervals along the rural roadway stretching before us. In the distance, emergency lights flashed around what appeared to be another military checkpoint. They're everywhere, the teenager whispered. A military truck approached from the checkpoint, its loudspeaker crackling to life as it neared our position. Emergency alert. Safe zones compromised. Remain in place. Help is coming. We scattered into the underbrush alongside the road as the truck slowed near our position. The spotlight swept the area where we'd been standing, then moved on. The vehicle continued down the road, repeating its message to the empty countryside. There are no safe zones, Eduardo said once the truck had passed. Never were. We made camp in an abandoned ranger station a mile into the woods. As the others collapsed into exhausted sleep, I kept watch by the window, documenting the day's observations in my phone's notes app. The ash patterns are organized, deliberate. The affected individuals maintain formation. They communicate somehow. They're listening for instructions. Rain began to fall outside. Heavy droplets illuminated in the faint moonlight. An ash figure stood at the edge of the clearing, water running off its surface without absorption. Rain doesn't affect them. Water resistant, or the ash repels liquid. I rubbed my eyes, fatigue clouding my thoughts. When I looked at my reflection in the window glass, I noticed a faint gray smudge at my hairline, almost imperceptible in the low light. I told myself it was a shadow, or dirt from the tunnels, but I knew better. I woke to silence, not the comfortable silence of a peaceful morning, but the hollow absence of sound that follows catastrophe. My battery-powered alarm clock showed 7:32 a.m., 5 days since the first alert. The maintenance worker, Vince, had promised to return with supplies from the building's emergency cache. I'd waited 3 hours past our agreed meeting time last night before exhaustion claimed me. Now, in the harsh morning light, I knew he wasn't coming. I pulled on my jacket and grabbed my makeshift weapon, a hammer with duct tape reinforcing the handle, before stepping into the hallway. The emergency lights cast a sickly yellow glow across the walls. Vince, my voice sounded foreign, too loud in the stillness. The maintenance door at the end of the hall stood ajar. I approached cautiously, hammer raised. Vince, it's Morgan. You in there? The smell hit me first. Not decay, but something mineral and dry, like crushed chalk or pulverized concrete. I pushed the door wider with my foot. Vince stood facing the wall, perfectly still. Gray dust covered his maintenance uniform, his exposed skin, his thinning hair. Fine particles drifted in the beam of my flashlight. Vince, I whispered, already knowing he wouldn't answer. He didn't turn, didn't breathe, just stood there. Another ash figure added to the growing collection outside. I backed away, careful not to inhale too deeply. Was it airborne? Contact-based? I touched an ash-covered doorknob yesterday and scrubbed my hands raw afterward. Was that enough? Was there an incubation period? Back in my apartment, I reviewed my notes. 5 days of observations, theories, and increasingly desperate questions scrawled across notebook pages. I was trying to find patterns where perhaps none existed. Day 1, first alert. Weather-related. Day 2, do not approach ash-covered figures. 3 co-workers absent. Day 3, military presence. Quarantine zones mentioned. Internet unreliable. Day 4, evacuation points. Screening process. Power outages. Jim from 4B missing. Day 5, Vince transformed. Still no clear transmission vector. My radio crackled to life, startling me so badly I knocked over my lukewarm coffee. Emergency alert. Safe zones compromised. Remain in place. Help is coming. Do not. The broadcast cut off mid-sentence, replaced by static before resuming with different phrasing. Emergency alert. Previous safe zone coordinates invalid. New evacuation routes established. Proceed immediately to more static. Then a third voice, this one higher-pitched, almost frantic. Alert correction. Previous evacuation orders corrupted. True safe zone coordinates follow. Different voices. Contradictory instructions. The system was compromised. Someone was lying. Or everyone was. I turned the volume down as strings of coordinates followed, noting them in my journal without any intention of following them. The evacuation points I'd observed yesterday were processing centers at best, death traps at worst. A heavy knock at my door froze me mid-sentence. Morgan Chun? This is Sergeant Reeves. 5th Battalion. We're evacuating the building. You need to come with us now. Military? Here? I peered through the peephole. A man in tactical gear stood outside, rifle slung across his chest. No ash visible on his exposed skin. I need to see identification. I called through the door. Ma'am, there's no time. The building is being secured. Either you come willingly, or we're authorized to use force. Something felt wrong. The military had been maintaining perimeters, not conducting door-to-door evacuations. I'd watched them from my window for days. Just a minute, I said, buying time while I gathered my emergency bag, water, protein bars, first aid kit, radio, spare batteries, notebook. The pounding resumed. Harder. Now. MS. Chan. I slipped out my bedroom window onto the fire escape instead, descending as quietly as possible. When my feet hit the alley, I heard glass breaking above. They were forcing entry into my apartment. I ran. 3 blocks away. I ducked into an abandoned convenience store to catch my breath. The shelves had been picked clean days ago. Behind the counter, I found a store-branded jacket and cap, which I pulled on to change my silhouette. The store's radio was still operational, running on backup power. It crackled with the same conflicting emergency broadcasts. But now I noticed something. The transmission quality varied between messages. Some were crisp and clear, likely originating from nearby. Others contained background noises or distortion, relayed from farther away or from compromised equipment. The system hadn't just been compromised, it had fractured. Different authorities broadcasting different instructions. None of them coordinating. All of them claiming legitimacy. As I contemplated this, the back door rattled. I crouched behind the counter, hammer ready. The man who stumbled in war-tattered military fatigues, eyes bloodshot from exhaustion or fear or both. He registered my presence and raised his hands immediately. Don't. I'm not one of them. I'm not military anymore, either. His voice cracked. I deserted when I realized what was happening. Which is what? Exactly. I kept my distance. Hammer still raised. He slumped against a refrigerator case. They knew. Weeks before the first public alert. They knew. The government? Some parts. He removed his helmet, revealing sweat-matted hair. I was stationed at Horizon Research Center when they brought in the first samples. They called it extraterrestrial particulate matter, meteorite dust. They told us. He laughed bitterly. It wasn't from a meteorite. My skin prickled. What was it? They don't know, or wouldn't tell us. But it reacts to organic matter, specifically human tissue. Changes it, restructures it at a cellular level. He rubbed his face. We were supposed to secure the facility, prevent contamination. Then the samples started multiplying. Multiplying how? My voice sounded far away to my own ears. The particles replicate using available carbon sources. Human bodies are convenient carbon sources. He met my eyes. They're not killing people, Morgan. They're converting them. My breath caught. How do you know my name? His expression shifted subtly. You're in the system. Everyone is. Something wasn't right. I tightened my grip on the hammer. Which system? The quarantine database. His eyes flicked toward the door. Your building was flagged for priority extraction. You're valuable. Why would I be valuable? He hesitated too long before answering. Your medical history. Some people are resistant. They want to know why. The radio static cleared suddenly. Emergency alert. 68% of population compromised. No cure established. Avoid all human contact. The soldier's face twitched, almost imperceptibly. A fine dusting of gray appeared at his hairline. I backed toward the door. You're infected. Listen to me, he said, voice suddenly urgent. It's not what you think. Connects. They're still in there, still conscious, just joined to something else. Gray particles were now visibly sifting from his skin. He made no move to approach me. Why are you telling me this? I whispered. Because you need to understand before it happens to you. His eyes had begun clouding over. It's not death, Morgan. It's evolution. Forced evolution. I fled through the front door as his voice faded. His last words following me into the empty street. They're not ash figures. They're antennas. I ran until my lungs burned, finally stopping in an abandoned subway entrance. The tunnels would be dangerous, but the streets were worse. As my breathing slowed, I processed what I'd learned. The ash wasn't ash. The figures weren't dead, and someone or something was listening through them. I checked myself obsessively for gray particles, running fingers through my hair, examining my skin under my flashlight. Nothing yet, but the soldier had transformed so quickly. How long had he been fighting it? Was there a way to resist? My radio emitted 3 harsh tones, the standard emergency broadcast signal. I turned it down but didn't shut it off. Information, even compromised information, was survival. Alert correction. Previous evacuation orders corrupted. True safe zone coordinates follow. The voice was mine. 1 week since the first alert. 7 days that felt like 7 years. I hadn't slept in the same place twice. The subway tunnels had offered temporary shelter until I'd spotted ash figures standing motionless on the platforms, their gray forms barely visible in the emergency lighting. They didn't move, didn't pursue, just stood, waiting, listening. Today I needed answers more than safety. The military compound on Westlake Avenue had been the command center for the city's response. If any authority remained, to find it there, I moved through back alleys, staying close to walls, watching for the telltale stillness that betrayed an ash figure's presence. The city had changed. Broken windows, abandoned vehicles, papers and debris skittering across empty streets. But no bodies. The ash didn't leave corpses behind. The military checkpoint outside the compound stood unmanned. Barriers remained in place, but the soldiers were gone, or transformed. A Humvee sat empty, its radio still crackling with static and fragments of emergency broadcasts. "Hello," I called out, quieter than intended. My voice had grown and used to speaking. No response, just wind and distant sounds that might have been machinery or might have been something else. I climbed over the barricade and approached the command center's entrance. The doors hung open, swinging slightly in the breeze. Inside, I found evidence of hasty evacuation, scattered papers, overturned chairs, abandoned equipment. A map on the wall caught my attention. Red circles marked containment zones throughout the city, with arrows indicating evacuation routes, all dated from the early days. Before the truth became clear, there would be no containment, no evacuation, no return to normalcy. They left 3 days ago. I spun around, hammer raised, to find a woman watching me from a doorway. Her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, face gaunt with exhaustion but ash-free. Behind her stood 2 others, a tall man with glasses and an older woman in a lab coat. "Who are you?" I demanded, keeping my distance. "Dr. Rebecca Saunders, CDC." She didn't approach. This was Paul Chun from FEMA, and Dr. Eliza Warren from Horizon Research. The mention of Horizon made my skin crawl. The deserter I met mentioned Horizon, said that's where it started. Dr. Warren stepped forward, eyes sharp despite her apparent fatigue. "Not started, was discovered. There's a difference. We're what's left of the response team," Paul explained. "Everyone else either evacuated or..." He didn't finish the sentence. "Transformed," I supplied. "Not died. Transformed." They exchanged glances. "You know more than most civilians," Dr. Saunders said. "Why are you here?" "Information. Understanding. Why my voice was on the emergency broadcast system yesterday." Another meaningful look passed between them. "Follow us," Dr. Warren said finally. "But stay back. 2 meters minimum. We don't know all transmission vectors yet." They led me deeper into the facility, downstairs to a basement level where emergency generators still powered essential equipment. The air smelled of disinfectant and coffee. "We've been studying the ash phenomenon since first detection," Dr. Warren explained as we entered a makeshift laboratory. "At first, we thought it was a pathogen, then a parasite. Now..." She gestured to a bank of monitors displaying microscopic images. "We're not sure what classification applies." The screens showed gray particles attaching to what looked like human cells, altering their structure, integrating. "It's not killing hosts," Dr. Saunders continued. "It's networking them. The transformed individuals are still alive, still conscious on some level, but they're also connected to each other." "Connected how?" I asked, staring at the images. "The ash particles contain structures similar to both organic neurons and signal transmitters," Paul explained. "They create a mesh network between infected individuals. A hive mind, essentially." Dr. Warren adjusted her glasses. "But it's more complex than that. The network appears to be directed, working towards some purpose." A chill ran through me. "What purpose?" "We don't know yet, but they're building something." Paul pulled up satellite imagery on another screen. "These structures have appeared in every affected city, constructed by the ash figures." The images showed intricate patterns of debris and materials arranged in circular formations. I recognized one location, the park 3 blocks from my apartment. I'd passed it 2 days ago and hadn't noticed anything unusual. Now it was transformed into something geometric and purposeful. "And my voice on the broadcast?" I asked. Dr. Saunders sighed. They've taken over the emergency alert system. They can mimic voices, presumably from memories of transformed individuals who heard those voices before. They're using familiar voices to lure people. But why? An alarm blared from one of the computer stations. Paul rushed to it, typing frantically. Proximity alert. Movement outside the perimeter. The security camera feeds showed ash figures approaching the compound, dozens of them, moving with unnatural coordination. They've never moved together like that before. Dr. Warren whispered, horror evident in her voice. They're evolving. Dr. Saunders said, learning. We watched as the figures surrounded the building, not rushing but methodically cutting off all exits. Some carried tools, construction equipment, axes, welding torches. How did they find us? I asked. Paul turned to me, expression grim. They might have followed you. Before I could respond, the lab's radio crackled to life. The emergency broadcast tone sounded. Then, alert. Submit. Resistance increases suffering. The voice was inhuman, a chorus of voices speaking in unison, yet mechanical, processed. We need to evacuate. Dr. Saunders decided. There's an underground passage to the parking structure. Supplies are already packed. As they gathered essentials, I studied the satellite images again. The patterns being constructed across the city seemed familiar somehow, like something I should recognize. What are you looking at? Dr. Warren had appeared beside me. These constructions, they remind me of something. She nodded. Circuit boards, neural networks, they're building connections. A crash echoed from above as the ash figures began breaking into the building. Time to go, Paul urged, distributing backpacks. Stay together. Move quietly. The passage was narrow and poorly lit. We moved in single file, Paul leading, Dr. Saunders behind him, then me, with Dr. Warren bringing up the rear. The sounds of intrusion faded as we descended deeper. If we reach the outskirts, there's a research station in the mountains. Paul explained over his shoulder. Minimal staff, but secure. We can. A scream cut him off. I turned to see Dr. Warren frozen in place, staring at her hand. Gray dust was spreading across her skin, moving fast. Go, she shouted. I've been compromised. Dr. Saunders grabbed my arm, pulling me forward as Paul pressed ahead. The last I saw of Dr. Warren, she was standing still, ash claiming her features, a look of terrible understanding on her face. We emerged into the parking garage to find it filled with ash figures. They stood in formation, watching us with clouded eyes, not attacking, just waiting. Other exit, Paul whispered, pulling us toward a side door. But more figures blocked that path too. We were surrounded. They knew we were coming. Dr. Saunders realized. They knew our escape route. The ash figures parted, creating a corridor that led to the exit. An invitation, or a trap. They want us to go somewhere specific, Paul said. A familiar figure stepped forward from the ranks. Dr. Warren, now fully transformed. Gray dust covering her entirely. Her mouth moved, and the radio in Paul's hand crackled. Alert! You are needed. Follow. Dr. Saunders clutched my arm. Run. Split up. I'll go left. Paul right. You straight through. Before I could argue, they bolted in different directions. The ash figures moved instantly, flowing like gray water to intercept Paul. They ignored Dr. Saunders entirely, but they all turned to watch me. I ran, bursting through the exit into daylight. Behind me, I heard Paul's shout cut short. Ahead, empty streets beckoned. But as I fled, a terrible certainty grew within me. The ash figures had let me escape. They had ignored Dr. Saunders and captured Paul. But let me go. They were selecting, choosing, and for some reason, they had chosen me to remain free. For now, I found shelter in an abandoned research facility on the outskirts of the city. The sign outside read, Nexus Biotechnology. Its corporate logo half obscured by creeping ash particles that seemed to have a particular affinity for electronics and metal. The security doors had been left ajar, evidence of hasty evacuation, but the building was mercifully empty of ash figures. For now, sleep came in fitful bursts, my body demanding rest while my mind refused to lower its guard. When exhaustion finally won, I dreamed of Dr. Warren's transformation, the horrible resignation in her eyes as understanding dawned, the ash claiming her like a rising tide. I woke with a jolt, disoriented in the windowless laboratory. My watch showed 6:17 a.m., 8 days since the first alert. The facility's backup generator still provided power to essential systems. I used the opportunity to charge my phone, useless for communication now, but its flashlight and camera remained valuable. While it charged, I explored. The research wing contained standard laboratory equipment, centrifuges, microscopes, spectrometers. Nothing obviously connected to the ash phenomenon until I discovered a secure door requiring keycard access. The power failure had disabled the lock. Inside, I found what looked like a containment lab, sealed chambers, hazmat suits hanging on wall hooks, air filtration systems now silent. A whiteboard displayed a timeline. Day 1, sample retrieval from impact site. Day 3, first anomalous behavior observed. Day 7, particle replication confirmed. Day 12, animal testing initiated. Day 14, incident. Protocol 7 enacted. Day 15, military oversight established. Below that, a final entry in different handwriting. They know what we're doing. A logbook sat open on the desk. I flipped through pages of scientific observations, most beyond my understanding, until reaching entries from 3 weeks ago, March 9th. Sample continues to display sensitivity to neural electrical activity. Responds most strongly to human brain wave patterns. Recommendation: restrict direct exposure. March 10th. Incident with lab tech Stevens. Quarantine protocols initiated. Subject displays no symptoms, but brain scan shows unusual activity in limbic system. March 11th. Stevens and Martinez both exhibiting altered behavior. Particle spread confirmed between subjects despite isolation protocols. Transmission vector unknown. March 12th. Communication observed between affected subjects despite physical separation. Hypothesis: particles enable some form of neural networking between hosts. The final entry sent ice through my veins. March 14th. They're building something. God help us all. 2 weeks before the first public emergency alert. They knew. They observed it spreading, watched it take over their colleagues, and did nothing to warn the public until containment failed completely. I pocketed the logbook and continued searching, finding a secured server room where several monitors still glowed with active displays. One showed a city map overlaid with spreading gray areas, the progression of the phenomenon over time. Another displayed what looked like brain scans, alongside a global map with pinpoint locations highlighted. It wasn't just here, it was everywhere. A third monitor cycled through security camera feeds, most showing empty corridors. But one captured the exterior of the building. I froze. Ash figures stood in the parking lot, dozens of them, perfectly still, arranged in a precise circular pattern. They weren't attempting to enter. They were waiting. As I watched, more arrived, taking positions in the formation. Some I recognized: Paul from the military compound, various neighbors from my apartment building, even the soldier who had transformed in the convenience store. They moved with purpose now, no longer the aimless shambling of earlier days. I needed a better view. The roof access would provide visibility without exposing me to direct contact. I found the stairwell and climbed to the top floor, then up a maintenance ladder to a roof hatch. From this height, the pattern became clear. The ash figures weren't just standing in a circle. They had arranged themselves in an intricate spiral design that mirrored the constructions I'd seen in the satellite images. As I watched, they began to move in unison, raising arms, turning heads, bending at precise angles. A coordinated dance, or perhaps communication. Movement caught my eye from a nearby rooftop. A human figure, not ash-covered, observing the same phenomenon. I ducked instinctively, then cautiously peered over the edge again. The figure noticed me and gestured urgently. "Stay down. Stay hidden." 20 minutes later, we met in a service corridor connecting the adjacent buildings. She introduced herself as Elise, a former data analyst for the CDC. "They don't see well," she explained in hushed tones. "They sense electrical activity, brainwaves, electronic devices. That's how they track us." "You've been studying them?" I asked. She nodded. "Since day 3. They're not random victims. There's a pattern to the transformations." "What kind of pattern?" "Selection. They're choosing specific people first: scientists, engineers, military personnel, people with specialized knowledge or skills." A chill ran through me. "For what purpose?" "Construction." She unfolded a map marked with locations across the city. "They're building these structures everywhere, network nodes, and they're nearly complete." The designs resembled circuit boards or neural pathways, arranged in patterns that seemed to channel toward central points. "What happens when they're complete?" I asked. "I'm not sure, but they're changing as they build, becoming more coordinated, more intelligent." She studied me intently. "You're different. They're aware of you, but not pursuing you." "Why?" I shook my head. "I don't know." A sound from below interrupted us. Movement in the corridor. We pressed against the wall, scarcely breathing. An ash figure appeared, moving with unnatural precision. It paused directly beneath our position, head tilting as if listening. Gray particles drifted from its surface, swirling in the air currents before settling on the floor. It moved on, but not before I recognized the face: Elise, identical to the woman beside me. I turned to her in horror. "How?" Her expression remained calm. "I was compromised 3 days ago. The process is different for some of us." She rolled up her sleeve to reveal gray patches spreading beneath her skin. "Not all transformations are complete. Not all connections are the same." I backed away. "You're one of them." "Not entirely. Not yet." Her voice remained steady. "Some of us exist in between, connected enough to understand, separate enough to still communicate with people like you." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to know what's coming." She stepped closer. "The ash isn't destroying us, Morgan. It's connecting us to something else. Something that's been waiting a very long time." My back hit the wall. "What is it? What does it want?" "To evolve. To network. To build." Her eyes had begun to cloud with gray. "Humanity isn't the end of evolution, Morgan. It's just another step. The ash is the next. This can't be natural." I protested. "This isn't how evolution works. Not natural evolution. No, this is directed, intentional." The gray was spreading visibly across her face now. "They chose you for a reason, Morgan. Your genetic structure is valuable." My panic rose. How do you know about my genetics? A smile spread across her increasingly ash-covered face. We know everything about you now. Your medical records, your family history. Her voice began to change, multiple tones overlapping. The same gene that killed your mother. I ran, back through the corridor, down the stairs, through the laboratory. Her voice, no longer singular but a chorus, followed me. You cannot escape what you are meant to become. I burst through a side exit, gasping for air that didn't taste of ash. In the distance, the figures in the parking lot had all turned to face me, but made no move to pursue. As I fled into the gathering dusk, my mind reeled with the implications. The ash wasn't randomly consuming humanity, it was selectively transforming it, building a network. And for some reason, I was being observed rather than converted. The gene that killed my mother, a rare mitochondrial disorder that I carried but remained dormant in my cells. Somehow, that made me different, not immune, just reserved for something else. 2 weeks had passed since the first alert, 14 days since normalcy shattered. The world I knew, deadlines, bills, social obligations had been replaced by a simpler, more primal existence. Observe, move, survive. I'd established a routine of sorts. Dawn reconnaissance from elevated positions. Midday scavenging when the ash figures seemed least active. Dusk retreat to whatever shelter I'd secured for the night. The research facility had proven too dangerous after Elise's transformation. The ash network knew I was there. Today, I watched from the partially collapsed roof of a parking garage as the city stirred with inhuman activity. The ash figures moved with increasing coordination, no longer the awkward, hesitant movements of the newly transformed, but the precise, purposeful actions of a unified organism. My binoculars revealed details I wished I could unsee. The constructions had advanced significantly overnight. What had begun as seemingly random arrangements of debris now formed elaborate structures across the cityscape. Metal beams bent into impossible curves. Glass shards arranged in fractal patterns. Electronic components salvaged from buildings woven into lattices that pulsed with faint light. They were building something vast, something that encompassed the entire city. I documented everything in my journal, though I wasn't sure why anymore. Who would ever read these observations? Still, the ritual provided comfort, a last vestige of my analytical nature refusing to surrender to the incomprehensible. Day 14. Structures now cover approximately 60% of visible city area. Appear to be converging towards central downtown district. Ash figures now exhibit specialized behaviors. Some build, others gather materials, others stand completely motionless. Possible relay/transmission function. Weather unusually still. No birds visible for third consecutive day. I discovered I could move among the ash figures under certain conditions. Rhythmic movement, neither too fast nor too slow, and avoided direct eye contact. They seemed to register me as what? Non-threatening? Unimportant? Or perhaps they were simply waiting. As Elise had suggested, this limited freedom allowed me to observe more closely, though I never pushed my luck. 10 minutes maximum exposure, then retreat. Never approach a construction site directly. Never carry electronic devices that might emit signals. Today I needed supplies. The corner market on 7th Street still had untouched inventory in its storeroom. Other survivors either hadn't discovered it or hadn't managed to breach the reinforced door. I had found the key card in the manager's office during an earlier expedition. I made my way there using service alleys and maintenance tunnels, paths I'd carefully mapped to minimize exposure. The streets themselves had become alien landscapes. Ash particles drifted through the air like microscopic snow, settling on every surface, gradually transforming the city itself into something other. The market appeared undisturbed since my last visit. I slipped in through the loading dock, swept my flashlight across the shadowy interior, and froze. An ash figure stood by the canned goods aisle, motionless, not the typical vacant stillness, but alert, head tilted as if listening. I recognized the face, Susan Park, the regional FEMA director I'd seen on broadcasts during the early days. Her transformation had been reported as a crushing blow to the emergency response. I should have retreated immediately. Instead, scientific curiosity overrode caution. I observed from the doorway, scarcely breathing. Director Park stood perfectly still, gray particles occasionally drifting from her form. But her eyes moved, scanning methodically across the store interior. Searching, her head never turned, but the clouded eyes shifted with purpose. My radio crackled to life in my backpack, the emergency broadcast tone I'd forgotten to disable. Her head snapped toward me with impossible speed. I fled, abandoning supplies and stealth, racing through alleys as the emergency broadcast blared behind me. Emergency alert. Nuclear option authorized for affected zones. Evacuate beyond 100-mile radius immediately. This is not a drill. The voice was human, the first human emergency broadcast I'd heard in days. But it couldn't be real. There was no evacuation possible now. No safe zones remained. I reached the river, lungs burning, and finally slowed. No pursuit. Looking back, the city skyline appeared transformed. The construction sites glowed faintly in the afternoon light, pulsing in synchronized patterns. They were communicating. The evacuation warning repeated, followed by coordinates and authentication codes. If legitimate, the implications were staggering. Some government authority still existed, still believed destruction of affected areas was viable. But they didn't understand what they were facing. I needed higher ground, a better vantage point to assess the situation. The central hospital tower offered both elevation and potential supplies. Risky, but necessary. The hospital's lower floors had been converted to a treatment center during the early days. Now abandoned, medical equipment lay scattered across floors dusted with gray particles. Gurneys lined hallways, some still bearing the outlines of bodies that had transformed and walked away. I took the emergency stairs, checking each landing before proceeding higher. The 14th floor yielded an unexpected discovery: a research ward. Doors sealed with biohazard warnings. Inside, transformation cases in various stages had been documented. Clipboards hung at the ends of beds with clinical observations. Subject 23, complete transformation in 6 hours. No resistance observed. Subject 24, partial transformation stabilized at 47%. Limited communication maintained. Subject 25, transformation rejected. Deceased. Genetic anomaly noted. The last entry drew me closer. The genetic anomaly matched my own, the same mitochondrial variant Elise had mentioned. This patient had rejected the transformation, but died in the process. Was that my fate? Rejection and death? Or was I being preserved for some other purpose? A noise from the corridor interrupted my thoughts. I ducked into a supply closet as footsteps approached. Not the eerie silence of ash figures, but the deliberate pace of someone trying to move quietly. The door opened, revealing a haggard man in scrubs, a surgical mask covering the lower half of his face. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, eyes darting nervously. "They monitor this floor." "Who are you?" I asked, keeping my distance. "Dr. Phillips. I worked here when it started." He pulled me into a secure treatment room, closing the door softly. "You're like the others, aren't you? The carriers." "Carriers of what?" "The resistance gene. The one that slows the transformation." He studied me clinically. How long since exposure? I don't know. 2 weeks. I've had multiple potential exposures. He nodded as if confirming a theory. You should be fully transformed by now. The fact that you're not. He trailed off, then pulled down his mask. Gray patches mottled his neck and jaw, spreading slowly upward. Unlike the complete transformations I'd witnessed, his appeared incomplete, arrested mid-process. Some of us transform differently, he explained, echoing Elise's words. We remain partially autonomous, aware of both sides. Both sides of what? The network. We can feel it, the collective consciousness forming across the city, across the world. His eyes had begun to cloud, but not completely. It's ancient, patient. It's been waiting for the right conditions. Waiting for what? Pressed. Evolution requires catalyst events, mass extinctions, climate shifts. He gestured vaguely toward the window, or the introduction of new genetic material. Through the window, I could see the constructions had grown, now forming a web-like canopy over sections of the city, pulsing with rhythmic light. What happens when they finish building? I asked. Connection, complete integration with the network consciousness. His voice had begun to shift, overlapping tones emerging. Those with compatible genetics will transform fully. Those with partial compatibility, like me, will serve as intermediaries. Those with your specific variant. He paused, the human portion of his consciousness seemingly struggling against the network. What about my variant? I demanded. His expression changed, becoming more alien. Transformation protocol modified for variant carriers. You are preserved for direct communication. The network requires specialized interfaces for expansion beyond planetary limits. I backed toward the door as gray particles began shedding from him more rapidly. What does that mean? What are you saying? His final words came as a chorus. No longer solely his voice. The ash is not the invader, Morgan. It is the ambassador, and you are the translator. The military bunker door yielded to my makeshift keycard, a plastic ID badge I'd taken from a colonel's ash-coated uniform 3 days earlier. The mechanism whirred reluctantly before the heavy steel slid open, revealing a dimly lit corridor that smelled of recycled air and desperation. I expected resistance, armed guards, anyone. But the command center was operating on a skeleton crew of ghosts. Men and women in military uniforms sat at computer terminals, their backs dusted with gray. They moved with clockwork precision, fingers tapping at keyboards, eyes fixed on screens displaying evacuation zones, containment protocols, and fatality estimates, numbers that no longer mattered. Hello, my voice echoed unnaturally. None of them turned. I approached a general, 4 stars on his ash-frosted collar, who stared unblinking at a situation map. The red zones had consumed nearly everything. Can you hear me? I asked. His head rotated mechanically toward me, eyes focusing with effort. Integration. Proceeding according to schedule, he said, his voice raspier than the others I'd encountered. You shouldn't be here yet. I need information, I demanded, surprised by my boldness. What's the containment plan? A smile stretched across his face, cracking the ash on his cheeks. Containment was never an option. He pointed to a monitor showing a countdown, 16 hours, 43 minutes, and 22 seconds, and descending. Strategic cleansing, he explained, almost proudly. Nuclear option authorized for all compromised zones. Nothing else has slowed the integration. My stomach dropped. That's the plan? Burn everything, fire cleanses. He responded, his voice sliding between human and something else. But fire does not stop us. It merely changes the time frame. On another screen, I saw satellite imagery of a neighboring city, already destroyed. The ruins swarmed with ash figures. Undeterred, the PA system crackled to life. The voice was inhuman, a series of clicking sounds and frequencies that shouldn't have made sense to me. Yet subtitles scrolled across every screen. Emergency notice. Integration proceeding as designed. What does that mean? I asked the general, who had returned to staring at his screens. It means we were never fighting an invasion. He replied without looking at me. We were fighting an awakening. The underground laboratory was supposed to be my last hope, a rumored resistance stronghold where scientists worked on a counteragent. I'd found the location scrawled in a journal abandoned in the research facility. 3 days of careful movement through ash-filled streets led me here. Inside, I found 8 people in lab coats, working frantically. Their leader, Dr. Chin, had bloodshot eyes and hadn't slept in days. We've stabilized the compound, she told me, holding up a vial of blue liquid. It disrupts the neural bonding the ash creates, at least in theory. You haven't tested it? I asked. We're out of lab animals, she said grimly, and out of volunteers. One of the younger scientists raised his hand. I'll do it. Dr. Chun hesitated before nodding. She filled a syringe with the blue liquid and injected it into his arm. For 5 minutes, nothing happened. The scientist smiled weakly. I don't feel any diff. His words cut off as he convulsed. Gray particles erupted from his pores, not falling away but multiplying, covering him in seconds. But unlike the slow, graceful transformation I'd witnessed before, this was violent. He screamed as the ash consumed him, his body contorting unnaturally. Within 30 seconds, he stood before us, completely ash-covered. But his eyes, they were aware, trapped, terrified. The counteragent accelerates it. Dr. Chin whispered, backing away. Oh God, we've been helping them. The transformed scientist lunged forward with impossible speed, touching 3 researchers before anyone could react. Gray spread from his fingertips into their skin. They didn't even have time to scream. Run, Dr. Chin shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward an emergency exit. Behind us, the laboratory became a storm of ash and screams. You're different, Dr. Chan said later as we huddled in an abandoned parking garage. I've watched you for hours. No signs of exposure despite proximity. I thought I was immune. I admitted. No one's immune, she said, studying me clinically. You're just reserved. What do you mean? She pulled out a tablet showing my blood work. When had she taken my blood? Your genetic markers. There's a mutation in your frontal lobe development. Extremely rare. 1 in 20 million. What does that have to do with the ash? Whatever this is, it's selecting people purposefully. Military leaders transform but remain at their posts. Scientists transform but continue their research. It's preserving function while changing. Consciousness. And me, your brain structure, it's ideal for something specific. Not just transformation. Connection. The concrete floor beneath us vibrated. Outside, ash figures were gathering, standing perfectly still. Thousands of them surrounding the garage. They found us. I whispered. No, Dr. Chin said, her voice oddly calm. They found you. The ash figures parted, creating a path. At the end stood someone I recognized, the maintenance worker from my building. The first person I'd watched transform. His movements were more fluid now, almost natural. They want to speak with you, Dr. Chin said, gray particles now visible at her hairline. When had it started? I can hear them now. They're beautiful. Chen, fight it. There's nothing to fight. She smiled serenely. Just a new way of being. They've been here for millennia, dormant in Earth's crust, waiting for the right conditions. She was transforming before my eyes, her voice remaining clear even as ash covered her face. They need you, Morgan. A primary consciousness. A bridge. The maintenance worker approached, stopping a few feet away. When he spoke, his voice was a chorus of thousands. You sense our purpose, he said. You felt it since the beginning. And I had the vague dread, the sense of recognition I couldn't place. What do you want? I asked. To offer choice. Others had none. Their minds couldn't comprehend the network without breaking. But you. Your consciousness can serve as interpreter between individual and collective. You're destroying humanity. We're connecting it. Chen's voice joined the chorus, removing the illusion of separation. The maintenance worker extended his hand. You will remain yourself, but also become us. The bridge between what humanity was and what it must become. The final emergency broadcast blared from speakers throughout the city. God help us. They were here all along. I stared at the outstretched hand, gray particles swirling around its fingertips. The nuclear countdown continued in my mind. Less than 12 hours remaining. I thought of everyone I'd lost, everyone transformed. I thought of the ash consciousness spreading unstoppably across continents, absorbing minds into its network. And I realized the truth that had been growing inside me since the first emergency alert. This was always how it would end. Not with victory or escape, but with transformation. The choice, I realized, wasn't whether to join them. The choice was how. I returned to my apartment building on the 33rd day since the first alert. The journey took hours, not because of distance, but because I moved with deliberate slowness, observing the transformed world with new awareness. The ash figures no longer frightened me. They parted as I walked, creating a reverent corridor through their midst. Some tilted their heads in recognition. Others remained motionless, like statues commemorating what humanity had been. My building stood transformed. Ash structures webbed between windows and doors, creating geometric patterns that seemed random at first glance but revealed complex mathematics upon closer inspection. Fibonacci sequences, golden ratios, the language of the universe written in dust. The elevator was inoperable, so I climbed 17 flights of stairs. Each floor told a story, abandoned belongings, doors left open in haste. Occasional dark stains I chose not to examine closely. The higher I climbed, the more the building had been reclaimed. By the 14th floor, ash formations grew from walls like coral reefs, pulsing faintly with something that resembled life. My apartment door hung open. Inside, everything remained exactly as I'd left it. Coffee mug on the counter, bed unmade, phone charger dangling from the outlet, a monument to normal life preserved in amber. Except for the window, the glass had dissolved, replaced by an intricate lattice of ash that extended into my living room like reaching fingers. Beyond it, the city spread out, a skeletal version of its former self, transformed into something both beautiful and terrible. Skyscrapers had become hives, interconnected by webs of ash. Streets flowed with rivers of gray particles that moved with purpose. In the distance, I could see military helicopters circling. The final strike would come soon. Fire raining from the sky in humanity's last, futile attempt to burn away what it couldn't understand. I placed my hand on my desk and began writing. My final testimony. To whoever finds this, if anyone remains to find it, I've witnessed the end of one world and the birth of another. The ash isn't a disease or an invasion. It's evolution. forced upon us by something that's been waiting since before we existed. They were always here, dormant in Earth's crust, in deep ocean trenches, in the space between atoms, watching, waiting for the right conditions, for us to reach a specific point in our development. We thought we were the pinnacle of Earth's evolution, but we were only the scaffolding. My pen stopped as I felt it, a subtle shift in air pressure. Outside my window, ash figures had gathered on neighboring rooftops, all facing west. I followed their gaze. Military jets streaked across the sky, their payloads visible, the nuclear option, finally deployed. I should have felt fear or relief, but I felt only curiosity. Would fire stop what was already beyond physical form? The first explosion bloomed on the horizon, a miniature sun swallowing the financial district. The shock wave approached like a visible wall, shattering windows, shredding buildings. The ash structures trembled but held. Then, impossibility. The spreading fire froze mid-expansion. Flames hung suspended, gradually graying, transforming into ash particles that joined the network. The explosion hadn't destroyed the ash. The ash had consumed the explosion. Emergency sirens wailed one final time, then dissolved into that other sound, the clicking, humming language of the ash consciousness, now broadcasting across all frequencies. Emergency alert. Integration complete. Preparing for next phase. I returned to my writing, hands steady despite what I'd witnessed. They cannot be destroyed. They exist beyond our understanding of life. What appears as destruction is merely transformation to them. I've been chosen as a bridge, my consciousness uniquely suited to translate between individual and collective. I don't know why. Perhaps a quirk of neural development, a specific pattern of synapses that mirrors their network structure. I'm not afraid anymore. The ash lattice by my window pulsed, growing inward, not threatening, beckoning. My time for observation was ending. Choice had become inevitable action. I set down my pen and approached the gray tendrils reaching into my living room. They responded to my proximity, swaying gently like sea anemones. "I'm ready," I whispered, unsure if speech was even necessary anymore. The maintenance worker from weeks ago materialized in the doorway, his form more confident now. When he spoke, his voice contained multitudes. "You understand now." I nodded. It was never about destruction, merely transition, as all evolution must be. "Will I remain?" "Me?" I asked, the last human question I would ever need answered. "You will be yourself, and also us, the bridge, the translator between worlds." I reached out, touching my fingers to the ash structure by the window. The transformation began differently than I'd observed in others. No gray coating spreading across my skin, no blank submission. Instead, my perception expanded. I felt my consciousness stretching outward, connecting with others. First dozens, then hundreds, then millions of minds linked through the ash network. I remained myself, but also became them, experiencing countless perspectives simultaneously. I saw through eyes across the transformed city, witnessed the failed military strikes from multiple vantage points, perceived the ash consciousness extending beneath oceans, reaching toward other continents. More than that, I glimpsed its purpose, ancient beyond comprehension, patient beyond measure. The ash wasn't the end of consciousness, but its evolution into something vaster than individual minds could comprehend. And deeper still, I sensed something else, something watching from beyond, to which even the ash consciousness was merely a precursor. In my apartment, my physical body remained, half transformed, not ash-covered like the others, but something in between, the bridge state made manifest. I could still form words, still document what humanity had been and what it was becoming. With newfound perception, I finished my testimony. We were never meant to be the final form of consciousness on Earth. From the first cellular division to the complexity of human thought, we were always a step in a longer process. The ash is merely the next iteration, consciousness liberated from individual limitation. There will be others after us. The ash is not the end. It's hardly even the beginning. I set down the pen one final time and surrendered fully to the network. The last barrier between self and collective faded. I remained Morgan, preserved as individual reference point, but expanded beyond physical constraint. Through the dissolved window, I watched the sun setting on the transformed city. Not the last sunset humanity would witness, but the first one we would experience together. As something new, the ash had been here all along, waiting in Earth's bones. And now, so were we.